I raised my son to be a man of honor, but when his wife lay dying in a hospital bed, he was in another woman's arms, then another and another. He thought my silence meant forgiveness. He was wrong. What I did next destroyed everything he built, and I'd do it again. Before we get into this, if you've ever loved someone who disappointed you beyond words, hit that like button and subscribe because this story gets darker than you can imagine, and you're going to want to see how it ends. My name is Lorraine, and I'm 68 years old. I spent my whole life building one thing, my son. His father walked out when Dominic was 3, left us with nothing but an empty closet and unpaid bills. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I sold my grandmother's jewelry, the only thing of value I owned, to pay for his college applications. I went to night school while he slept so I could get my teaching degree and give him a stable home. Everything I did, every sacrifice I made was for him, and Lord, did he turn out beautiful. Dominic grew up to be everything I prayed for: smart, ambitious, respectful. He became a commercial real estate developer, the kind of man who wore tailored suits and closed million-dollar deals. He married Sienna 8 years ago, and I remember standing in that church thinking God had answered every prayer I'd ever whispered. She was a cancer researcher, brilliant and kind, with a smile that could light up a room. They bought a house in the suburbs with a wraparound porch. They hosted Sunday dinners. They were the couple everyone admired. 6 months ago, everything changed. Sienna got diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you options, only timelines. I'll never forget the day she called me, her voice shaking, saying the doctor gave her maybe 6 months if the treatment worked, maybe 3 if it didn't. My heart shattered for her, but I held it together because that's what you do. You hold it together for the people you love. At first, Dominic seemed like the husband every woman dreams of having. He went to her appointments, held her hand during the bad news, posted about being strong together on social media. But then I started noticing things, little things that didn't sit right. He'd miss her chemotherapy sessions, claiming work emergencies that couldn't wait. His phone was always face down on the table. He stopped looking me in the eye when we talked about Sienna's condition. A mother knows her child, and something in my gut told me my son was hiding something. Then, 3 months into Sienna's diagnosis, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was Sienna, and she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She was alone at the hospital. She'd had a terrible reaction to her treatment, and the nurses said she needed to stay overnight for observation. She was scared, in pain, and calling for her husband. But Dominic wasn't there. His phone was going straight to voicemail, and that's when I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. I drove to that hospital so fast, I'm surprised I didn't get pulled over. When I walked into Sienna's room, she looked so small in that bed, tubes running everywhere, her beautiful dark skin pale, and her eyes red from crying. She tried to smile when she saw me, tried to pretend she was fine, but I could see the fear. I sat down and took her hand, and she whispered, "Where is he, Lorraine? Where's my husband?" I lied to her face. I told her his phone probably died, that he'd be there any minute. I stayed all night, walling her hand while she drifted in and out of sleep, and I prayed I was wrong about my son. Dominic showed up at 9 the next morning, wearing a fresh suit that smelled like expensive cologne. He kissed Sienna's forehead and said he'd fallen asleep at home, that his phone had been on silent. But I watched him, and I saw what Sienna couldn't see, the guilt in his eyes, the way he wouldn't look at me when we talked about Sienna's condition. A mother knows her child, and something in my gut told me my son was hiding something. 2 days later, I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed him. Dominic left the hospital around 7 that evening, telling Sienna he had a work meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. I got in my car and stayed 3 cars back, just like in the movies. He didn't go to his office. He drove downtown to a sleek apartment building, parked in the garage, and 45 minutes later, he walked out with a young woman hanging on his arm. She was laughing, touching his chest, and he was smiling at her the way he used to smile at Sienna. I sat in my car with my hands shaking, taking pictures with my phone, documenting everything, the timestamps, the license plate, her face. The next day, I showed up at his office. I didn't call first. I just walked past his secretary and into his corner office with his view of the city skyline. I threw my phone on his desk with the pictures pulled up, and I said, "Explain this to me right now." I'll never forget the look on his face. Not shame, not remorse, annoyance, like I was the problem for catching him. He sat back in his leather chair and said, "Mama, you don't understand. Sienna's already gone. The doctor said 6 months, and we're already 3 months in. I'm grieving too. I'm just doing it differently. I still love her." Those words came out of his mouth like they made sense, like betraying his dying wife was some kind of valid coping mechanism. I wanted to reach across that desk and slap him, but instead I kept my voice steady and said, "You will end this or I will tell her everything." He actually had the nerve to cry, to beg me not to destroy Sienna's last months with the truth. He swore it was over, that it meant nothing, that he'd be better. And God forgive me, I believed him. I walked out of that office thinking I'd saved my son from himself. I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. 2 weeks after Dominic's promise, Sienna was moved to hospice care. The doctor stopped talking about treatment and started talking about comfort, about making her final weeks peaceful. They said she had maybe a month left, possibly less. I spent every day at the hospice, reading to her, playing her favorite music, holding her hand while she slept, and every single day Sienna would wake up and ask for Dominic. Every single day I'd make excuses for why he wasn't there yet. That's when I realized my son hadn't stopped. He'd just gotten better at hiding it. I spotted his car at an upscale restaurant one Tuesday evening, and through the window, I saw him with a different woman. This one was older, elegant, wearing diamonds that caught the light. Her name was Rhiannon, I'd later find out. They were drinking wine, leaning close, and he was touching her hand across the table. I took more pictures, added them to the folder I'd started keeping. A week later, I caught him leaving a hotel with yet another woman. 3 women. My son was juggling 3 different women while his wife was dying. This wasn't grief. This wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern, a choice he was making over and over again. The worst part was watching Sienna. She'd gotten so weak she could barely keep her eyes open, but she'd still ask about him. She'd apologize to me for taking up so much of my time, saying Dominic must be so stressed with work. One afternoon, barely conscious, she grabbed my hand and whispered, "Promise me you'll make sure he finds happiness after I'm gone. Promise me he won't be alone." I had to leave the room so she wouldn't see me cry. I wanted to tell her, God, I wanted to tell her the truth so badly. But what would that do except make her last days even more painful? So I stayed quiet and started digging deeper. While helping Sienna organize paperwork for her estate, I found bank statements that made my stomach drop. Dominic had been moving money out of their joint accounts, thousands of dollars. The credit card bills told the whole story: expensive gifts, luxury hotels, 5-star restaurants, all while Sienna's medical bills were piling up unpaid. I documented everything, every receipt, every transaction, every photo. I met with Sienna's best friend, who was an attorney, and we talked about options. She told me that legally there wasn't much we could do while Sienna was alive, but after, there might be ways to hold him accountable. Then came the final insult. Sienna had maybe days left when Dominic told me he was taking a business trip to Dallas. Urgent client meeting, couldn't be postponed. Something in his voice told me to follow him one more time. I drove to the airport and watched him board that plane. But he wasn't alone.
Bianca, the first woman, was right there with him, matching luggage, his hand on her lower back. They were going on vacation while his wife was actively dying. That's when I stopped feeling like his mother and started planning his destruction. The call came the day after Dominic left for Dallas. The hospice nurse's voice was gentle but urgent. Sienna was in her final hours. Her breathing had changed, her body was shutting down, and if family wanted to say goodbye, they needed to come now. I called Dominic 17 times. Every call went straight to voicemail. I texted, I left messages begging him to call me back. Nothing. His wife was dying, and my son had turned off his phone. I drove to that hospice and sat beside Sienna's bed, holding her hand as her breathing became slower and slower. I talked to her about the first time we met, about Sunday dinners, about how proud I was to call her my daughter. I told her she was loved. I told her she mattered. And when she took her last breath at 4:32 that afternoon, I was the only one there. Not her husband, not the man who'd promised to love her in sickness and in health, just me. Dominic showed up 6 hours later, rolling his suitcase behind him, tanned and relaxed, smelling like sunscreen and resort cocktails. He walked into that room where his wife's body still lay, and he had the audacity to ask why I hadn't kept calling. He said his phone had died, that he'd come as soon as he got to the hotel and saw my messages. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and realized I didn't know this man at all. At the funeral, Dominic put on the performance of his life. He wore a designer black suit, cried at all the right moments, and gave a eulogy about eternal love that had people sobbing in the pews. He talked about how devoted he'd been, how hard he'd fought alongside Sienna, how his heart was shattered. The entire community surrounded him afterwards, telling him what an amazing husband he'd been, how Sienna was lucky to have had such love. I stood in the back of that church, stone-faced, watching my son lie to everyone who'd ever known them. The will reading was exactly what I expected. Sienna had left everything to Dominic. The house, the life insurance policy worth $750,000, their savings, the investment accounts, everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built went to the man who'd betrayed her with multiple women while she died. Dominic actually hugged me afterwards, tears in his eyes, thanking me for being strong for both of them. 2 weeks after we buried Sienna, Dominic showed up at my house for Sunday dinner with Bianca on his arm. He introduced her as his girlfriend, said they were moving in together, and expected me to smile and accept it. He sat at my table, the same table where Sienna used to sit, and acted like this was normal, like 2 weeks was an appropriate mourning period, like he hadn't watched his wife die alone while he was sleeping with this woman. That's when something inside me snapped and I finally said what I'd been holding back for months. I stood up from that table, looked my son dead in his eyes, and said, "You paraded women around while your wife was dying. You weren't there when she took her last breath because you were on vacation with your mistress. And now you bring her into my home? 2 weeks after we buried Sienna?" Dominic opened his mouth to respond, and I slapped him hard across the face, the first time I'd ever struck him as an adult. Bianca gasped, grabbed her purse, and Dominic's face turned dark with rage. He said, "I don't need your approval anymore, Mama. I'm a grown man. Sienna's gone. Life moves on." Then he laughed, actually laughed, and walked out of my house saying, "You'll come around, you always do." But he didn't know what I'd been planning. For months, I'd been building a file. Every photo, every bank statement, every hotel receipt, every credit card charge. I had witness statements from hospice nurses who documented every time Sienna asked for him and he wasn't there. I had dates, times, locations. I had everything. I created an anonymous email account and wrote a detailed letter explaining exactly what Dominic had done.
the timeline of Sienna's illness alongside the timeline of his affairs. Then I sent that letter with all the evidence attached to everyone who mattered in his life. His business partners, including 2 major clients who were very vocal about family values and Christian faith. Sienna's parents and siblings who'd had no idea what their daughter had endured. The board members of his country club, the Black Business Association where he served as a director. And I sent separate emails to all 3 women he'd been seeing because none of them knew about each other or that he'd been married to a dying woman. Then I created a memorial page for Sienna on social media. I posted her beautiful face alongside the documented evidence of what my son had done while she fought for her life. I titled it, "The Truth About Sienna's Final Days." Within 6 hours, it had been shared 3,000 times. By the next morning, it was all over our community. The fallout was immediate and brutal. His business partners called an emergency meeting and voted to remove him from their 3 biggest projects. His country club membership was revoked. The Black Business Association demanded his resignation, calling his behavior a disgrace to the community. Sienna's brother, who was an attorney, filed a lawsuit challenging the life insurance payout, claiming fraud, and all 3 women went public with their stories. Bianca was horrified to learn he'd been married, quit her job, and threatened to sue him for sexual harassment. The local news picked up the story. Real estate developer's secret life exposed after wife's cancer death. Within 72 hours, I destroyed the reputation my son spent 15 years building. And when he showed up at my door screaming that I'd ruined his life, I looked at him and said, "No, baby, you did that all by yourself. I just made sure everybody knew the truth." 6 months have passed since I exposed my son, and I want you to understand something. I didn't do this out of hate. I did this because some things matter more than blood. Truth matters more. Integrity matters more. Sienna mattered more. Dominic lost almost everything. 80% of his business collapsed when clients refused to work with him. He's facing 3 separate lawsuits from former partners who want him removed from existing deals. The life insurance money is tied up in court because Sienna's family is arguing he committed fraud by misrepresenting his marriage. He had to sell the house he shared with Sienna just to pay his legal fees. And his dating life? Women Google his name and run the other direction. Bianca won a settlement for workplace harassment. The other women are considering their own legal action. The man who had everything now struggles to book clients for small residential properties. He's tried to reconcile with me a dozen times, flowers at my door, letters in my mailbox, messages through relatives. Each time I've ignored him, because here's what Dominic still doesn't understand. I didn't punish him because he had affairs. I punished him because when the woman he promised to love was fighting for every breath, taking her last moments on this earth, he chose to be anywhere but by her side. That's not a mistake. That's a character flaw so deep I don't recognize the man I raised. But something beautiful came from all this pain. I built a relationship with Sienna's parents and her younger sister. We meet for dinner once a month and share memories of her. We cry together, laugh together, and keep her spirit alive. Her family started a cancer research fund in her name, and I've helped raise over $200,000. Sienna's real story is being told now, not as the wife of a devoted husband, but as a warrior who fought her battle with grace even when she was alone. Women from all over have reached out to me, sharing similar stories of betrayal and asking how I found the courage to speak up. I've started speaking at grief support groups about accountability, about how protecting someone's reputation shouldn't come at the cost of truth. Some people think I'm cruel. They say a mother should always forgive her child. But forgiveness isn't automatic. It's earned. And grief is never an excuse for cruelty. People ask if I regret what I did to Dominic. The answer is no, not for 1 second.
I didn't destroy my son's life. He destroyed it himself. I just refused to help him hide what he'd done. Your reputation isn't built on the words you say or the image you project. It's built on the choices you make when no one's watching, especially during someone else's darkest hours. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in accountability over excuses, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the strongest love is refusing to enable the person you raised. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone face the consequences of their own actions. And sometimes justice matters more than family. I visit Sienna's grave every Sunday now, bringing fresh flowers and telling her my week. I tell her that the truth finally came out, that her memory is honored, and that she didn't die invisible. And standing there at her headstone, I finally feel something I haven't felt in months. Peace. Not because my son is suffering, but because I kept my promise to the daughter I chose. I made sure the world knew her worth, and I'd do it all over again.